Thanks for tuning in to the Drive On podcast, where we are focused on giving hope and strength to the entire military community. Whether you're a veteran, active duty, guard, reserve, or a family member, this podcast will share inspirational stories and resources that are useful to you. I'm your host, Scott DeLucio, and now let's get on with the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to Drive On. I'm your host, Scott DeLucio, and today my guest is Neil Mullaney. Neil is a retired Air Force colonel and a veteran of 4 combat tours and 2 combat commands. He has been a key player in the healthcare sector as a former executive with Humana and is currently serving as the executive director of Heroes on the Water. And today we'll be discussing aspects of military life, the transition from military to civilian life, and exploring the alternative therapies for mental health and wellness and the types of work that they are doing at Heroes on the Water. So before we get into all of that, though, Neil, I want to welcome you to the show. I'm glad to have you here.
I appreciate it, Scott, very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into kind of what it is that you're doing now, could you just maybe walk us through just a little background on yourself and your time in the Air Force and the tours that you saw and kind of any experiences that stood out for you and any of them that maybe led you to the direction of where you are today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so I don't know how far back you want to go, but I was born and raised right here in where I'm at, Louisville, Kentucky. So I'm back in my hometown. I was number 5 out of 6 kids. So Irish Catholic family, it's typical back in those days. And then I had the unique opportunity to have a letter from my university that invited me to sit out a semester and rethink my priorities in life. I always like to start with that because people think that when they see my career and all that kind of stuff, they think that I just had it all planned out and everything just went seamlessly. That is not the case. I essentially flunked out of college my first attempt. I had a petition to get back in, recognizing that I needed the discipline of something more than going to a liberal arts large university where you're in an auditorium with 300 other students and the professor doesn't care if you're there. So I searched around and I went and joined the Air Force ROTC detachment. And that's really when I got to begin my journey about learning about the military and really forming a love for it and a passion and felt the calling. So that skipped over one hurdle that gave me the direction I needed. So I buckled down, ended up being a distinguished graduate from the ROTC detachment. So I like to say I flunked out first and then I ended up being a DG, in the end. But that wasn't the end of my initial trials, even coming into the Air Force, because I wanted to be tip of the spear in the Air Force. That typically means you're going to fly airplanes. We're really one of the only branches that sends our warfighters who are primarily officers. As opposed to the Army where there's, you're leading a large group of troops. Well, the Air Force, the enlisted support the officers and send them off to war.
Sure.
That's what I wanted to do. But it turns out that I had color vision problems. And so I couldn't pass the color vision test. So I lost my pilot slot. And so I really had a decision, to make then. I'm about to, graduate college, get my commission, and now I'm not going to do what I thought I was going to do. But I still had the passion. I still felt the call to serve. And so next thing I want to do then is be as close to, being the tip of the spear as I can. And that led me actually being probably closer than most pilots, and that's into the special operations community. So I was very fortunate to, get in down at the first Sal at Kilbert Field. Quickly learned what I didn't know because that, of course, was a high-speed, low-drag organization. Actually, no sooner than I stepped foot after, initial training, I was in Panama and we were kicking Noriega out. Then 9 months later, deployed to the first Gulf War. So within, 2 years of being on active duty, the United States went 20 plus years without being in combat. In 2 years of being on active duty, I already deployed twice with people shooting at me and not being very friendly. So it was truly an eye opener for me. And I quickly learned a lot of things. First being that I didn't know everything and so it was very formative and informative years for me during those early years. And I also found out that, guess what, being in the military is a lethal business. It's dangerous and deadly. So unfortunately, during the Gulf War, I had two close friends that were on Spirit 03, which was the Spectre gunship that got shot down in the Gulf War. So in an instant, we lost 14 crew members, being the largest loss in the Air Force, single loss that the Air Force had experienced. And so that kind of woke me up. It's like, you know what, this isn't just all the cool stuff and getting to do all the high speed training and all that. This is serious business, and I need to take it seriously.
That's right.
Yeah, and so and then and when you're young like that, you just got almost a blind faith of our elected officials and our senior leaders and all that, where you just fully trust them. They tell you to
Mhm.
go take that hill, you go and you try to take that hill. So as you progress through, your military career and you get a little bit longer in the tooth, like I am now, you learn a lot more and you know where to push back and where to question. And, it doesn't really do us a whole lot of good to question why, because the elected officials are the ones that decide where we go and what we do. But we can, push back on how we do it and does this make sense? And, how hard do we push? And is it worth putting our troops at risk? And so I learned how to do that to the point where, my last tour, you fast forward, I went to war as a lieutenant and as a colonel. I highly recommend going as a colonel. But I was able to, you have just a totally different perspective because, we're getting ready to deploy. I'm looking around at my troops, and this was a joint unit. So I had both Army and Air underneath my command. And I mean, they're the same age I was when I came in, but they just look different. From this perspective, as being the old man in the room, they just look like a bunch of kids. And we were assigned a mission that, I didn't necessarily personally agree with. I thought it was a waste of time. It was just endangering our lives on a daily basis for something that wasn't, going to really bear any true fruit. And, but still push through. And my troops never knew that. It wasn't until
Sure.
years afterwards to having a get together with them that I really shared that, hey, I wasn't a big fan of this mission at all. My number one goal was to execute the mission, but in a way that didn't put us in any undue, harm. There was still risk involved every day and all that kind of stuff, but it was a totally different focus. When I was a lieutenant, it was like, hey, hard charger, didn't care, just run out and go. As a colonel, I was like, hold on, guys, let's take a step back, let's think about this. And so it really, what that career and having been exposed to so many different combat scenarios and a bunch of other deployments, all kinds of humanitarian relief and nation building and stuff like that, it just really gives you the sense of when to push hard and when to stop and take a moment and really think things through. And I think that carried forward, from the military into my civilian career and into my family, into raising kids and being a better father, a better husband. And, one of my favorite quotes is, from Mel Gibson in the movie, we were soldiers, when the young lieutenant's in the chapel, asking Mel Gibson about being a soldier and a father. And his response was, I think being one makes me better at the other. It doesn't say which is which. And I find that to be, that just echoes with me. It just resonates with me.
Yeah, and that does make a lot of sense too, because there's so many parallels that can cross between uh, both of those, and and you're right. You don't have to say which one. It's not a chicken and the egg kind of scenario.
The symbiotic.
One could come before the other. Yeah, exactly. Symbiotic. They come together, and the stuff that you learn as a leader in the military, you can apply to your family life, and then vice versa, you can do that. So and both of those, they apply, just about equally as true in either field. um as a colonel, you probably are a little closer to the decision makers during those deployments, so you probably felt like you could push back a little bit more on some of the things that you were kind of questioning, tactics and things like that. But as a lieutenant, uh, you know, a lot of us were young and dumb at at that age. We felt like we were invincible and we could do just about anything. And so yeah, tell me to go take that hill. I'm going to go take that hill. I'm not gonna ask why, I'm just gonna go do it, you know?
Because you
But
trust the fact that the decision makers had all the information, were making the correct decision, and your job was just to execute it.
that's right.
Get
That's
older,
right.
you're like, wow, maybe they didn't have it all together because now I'm that guy making those decisions. And I don't feel like I've got it all together.
Right. And I think, the older we get in life, we start to realize that nobody's got it all figured out. We're all kinda just winging it from time to time. I mean, it's a little bit, not quite that dire, but, we realize that from day to day, we may not have the perfect answers to everything, you know?
Well, and I think
Uh,
that, and I think one of the beautiful things about spending time in the military is that you're immediately just thrusted into a diverse situation. And
right.
it could be based on socioeconomic, it could be race, religion, gender. It could be services. I mean, each of the services have different cultures. And especially being, two of my commands were joint commands. And so I had the opportunity to spend an inordinate amount of time with the Army for an Air Force guy. And I loved it. One of my favorite things was, in Afghanistan, that last tour, is how close I got with my command sergeant major. And, we were on, when we first got in country, we were assigned to Bagram, which, Bagram was a huge base, 30,000 people on it. And it was but only a few of us ever went outside the wire. Well, at that point, they were doing some shuffling of the forces, and they didn't have enough maneuver units out in the battle space, so they kicked us off Bagram. Well, we go to, our new combat outpost, and we have to build it. I mean, we have to build the B huts we're living in and working in and running missions out of and all that kind of stuff. So the sergeant major and I decided to be helpful, and we're going to go to supply and pick up the materials. And and I have a different way of doing things. Some other Army 06s may have a different way of doing things or whatever. We could walk into supply. For one thing, that'd scare the shit out of any troop when you 06 and a command sergeant major walking in to draw supplies. And so anyway, I give the rec to the sergeant major. He fills it out because he knows construction. He knows what we need. We hand it back to the young troop, working the counter. And he looks at it. He goes to his little file, pulls out the signature card. And my name's not on the signature card. And I'm the one that signed the requisition. And he comes back to sweating bullets. And I could see the fear in his eyes. And he's stuttering a little bit. He goes, sir, I'm sorry, but your name's not on the card on who's authorized to draw supplies from your unit. And I just kind of smiled, Sergeant Major, because we don't know each other that well. I mean, we did some spin-up training, some pre-deployment training together and all that kind of stuff. But this is still a new relationship. So he's a little nervous. He doesn't know how I'm going to react to this. And I just kind of smiled, and I was like, well, son, I said, just think about this. I said, you have the letter that authorizes those on the signature card to pull supplies for my unit. He goes, yes, sir. I said, why don't you go get that? So he goes, gets the letter. I said, who signed that letter? And so he looks at the signature, looks at my name tag, and he's like, yes, sir, right away. It just probably the fastest any supplies have ever been loaded in the
Yeah,
history
right.
of Army logistics. But anyway, we walk in, the sergeant major, my sergeant major, he goes, boss, he goes, I just got to thank you. I'm like, for what? He goes, you don't know how many people would have just stood there and ripped that young man up one downside the other until they got what they wanted. That's what Sergeant Major, he was just doing his job. I was just helping
Right.
him come to the right conclusion. So,
Right.
but that's just a
Yeah.
different culture, difference in upbringing, difference in everything. And it's just an example of the diversity that that you come across when you're in the military. And so I think that sets us up post-military to be thrusted into a corporate environment where maybe they go a little over the top
Mhm.
on some of these things, but at least we're well embedded and we know how to interact with different walks of life. And I think there's so many things that help prepare us for post-military career that we don't even think about until we take time to sit back and say, oh, you know what, that may have been a nugget I pulled from this particular deployment or this tour or whatever.
Right, right. Let's fast forward a little bit. So after your career, transitioning out, that's something that we all deal with at one point or other, no matter how long you stay in the military. Um, transfer out into the civilian world, finding a new career and, new things to do with yourself. Um, how did that transition look like for you? How did you navigate that, getting out of the military?
Once again, I wish I could say that it was very thought out and planned. I would like to say there was a whole lot of luck involved because I did. I mean, I ended up in healthcare. I knew nothing about healthcare. What I did, though, is that I sat back and decided, okay, I still wanted to serve in some capacity. I was very fortunate in my military career that I was at the unit level, my entire, and my last assignment when I came back from Afghanistan, they were moving me to a staff job, and that's when I decided to retire. So I avoided the staff until the very end, and then I only lasted there for a year, and I was like, this isn't me. I got to get out. But
Sure,
anyway, the point being is that during that time when I was no longer a commander and I was in the staff row, and I started thinking about retirement, it's like, well, what is it that I want to do? I mean, I had such a diverse background in the military. There was nothing that really just like said, this is just what I really want to do. I thought more to myself, well, I'm capable of doing just about anything if someone's willing to give me the opportunity. So I focused more on where I wanted to go, which I wanted to be in my hometown, and then what the opportunities were there. In Louisville, Kentucky, it's a large healthcare industry. There's, also some industries that aren't as healthy. Like, we got Papa John's Pizza, is headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky. So it really comes down to that decision. Do I want to help Papa sell more pizzas, or do I want to help people achieve their best health? And so I
sure,
target Humana, as the company, but I didn't know what to apply for. And I had no clue. I was coming out. I was used to being in the military as a somewhat of a senior officer, and I was comfortable in that culture and that environment. But I didn't even know what that equated to on the outside. In my mind, it equates to being a CEO of at least a mid-sized company because as a commander, I mean, you are. I mean, you're probably even broader than a CEO with the amount of responsibility that you have. But I knew that, the civilian sector probably didn't see it that way.
sure.
So I got lucky. I applied for, a job that I really didn't even know what it was. The recruiter, which is unusual, there was something that flagged in her mind that resonated with her. And so at least I got an opportunity to talk to somebody. And that's all I wanted. Just give me an opportunity to talk to somebody. And then, the rest will fall into place. And so that's what happened. But fast forward, my first day on the job, it's not like going into the military where they send you off to training and they train you, to where now when you're finished with your training, you're equipped to at least perform at this level,
Right.
of the job that you're required to do. That didn't happen there. Matter of fact, for the first 6 months, my boss never even had a one-on-one with me. Was going to her asking, what are your expectations? What are the roles, responsibilities? How are you going to measure my performance? And it's like I was speaking a foreign language. So my transition was very rough. If it wasn't for one individual, and that's why one of the things that I would, implore any veteran transitioning, the transition isn't over when you get the job. It's really just beginning. There's a lot of hard work to get that job, but the transition really just starts when you're stepping your foot into that new environment. So find yourself a mentor. And then after you found that mentor, you find someone to be a mentee. You mentor someone. Well, one guy who happened to be, the chief of staff for this business segment just came to me. And I guess he knew enough about the military, knew enough about, maybe my background. And he just came to me and he said, Neil, he goes, I know you're struggling. And I just smiled, and he goes, I can see it. He goes, all I'm going to do, he goes, you have value, you have, the abilities that we need. I just want to let you know there's going to be some changes coming. I'm just going to ask you to stick it out just a few more months and you'll see, that things are changing. And to his credit, that's what happened because how he knew, I mean, I literally was going home in the evenings talking with my wife saying, you know what, I'm just not cut out for the civilian sector. Maybe I need to go find a government job somewhere or something,
Right.
which I not wanted to do. I didn't want to be that stereotype of going from, the military and then right into a federal GS position or something. and it worked out, and it did, and it turned out the organization needed the leadership more than they needed healthcare, expertise. I
Mm.
could learn enough about healthcare, but the leadership came from 24 years of being in military and progressively increasing leadership roles that I was able to bring some benefit to the organization.
In a way, as I'm hearing your story, I'm thinking to myself that here we had a colonel coming out of the Air Force who is talking about a rocky transition, not maybe the smoothest transition story that you ever could have heard of. Um, and you hear these types of stories from all sorts of guys from any rank, from E1 all the way up. I've even had generals on this show who have had similar stories, and it in a way it's sort of refreshing because it's like, oh, it it's not just me. It's not, it's everybody. I mean, people who had it all lined up for them in the military, where everything was seemed like things were smooth sailing, things were going well. They take off that uniform and all of a sudden they're just like everybody else. And they got to figure out, what do I want to do when I grow up? That type of thing, right?
You don't even know. You don't even know what your options are, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
I had no clue. I had no clue about the business, but I get in there and I knew, the mission of the business because they were, it was Humana and it was their military business segment, which ran the TRICARE contract. And we also ran, 30 some odd VA clinics and stuff. So I believed in what they were doing because their job was to ensure, that our church remained healthy and the retirees and their families and all that kind of stuff. So it's something I could get behind and
Yeah.
work my way through, but it wasn't easy. And I'll tell you that it's incumbent on us as the veterans transitioning to do the legwork to be able to transcribe, to transfer, what we did in the military in a language that the civilian sector can understand, because they're not going to take the time to understand our jargon.
Right.
So we really do have to take the time, help each other out, and in order to get that resume or that CV to resonate with somebody. And it took me about 6 months to do that. I mean, there was a lot of trial and error. And then finally, when I felt like I got it right, boom, that's when I got the hit and was able to then put in my retirement paperwork and go ahead and make the move. So,
Yeah, and sometimes that we get so stuck in the military with some of the jargon and the acronyms that we use and the language. It's a different language that you're talking when you're in the military, but when you translate that to the civilian world, you're right. People, unless they have a military background, if you're going to apply for a defense contractor or some company like that that has pretty good understanding of a military, language and terminology and stuff like that, they'll be able to maybe translate it. But your typical civilian job is, they're not like you said, they're not going to take the time to try to understand that. It's just going to be a bunch of words that don't make a whole lot of sense to them. And not to say that those experiences are not valuable. It's just you have to do the legwork of translating it for them. So
yeah, I mean, the experiences are absolutely valuable.
yeah,
And if anything, because I tell, whenever I have the opportunity to help troops that are transitioning and, are looking to transition, that's what I tell them. I said, everything you have done demonstrates an ability or a capability that the civilian sector desperately needs.
yeah,
So what I tell them is that you have to be able to take the uniform off and really just immerse yourself into that new culture. Now, that doesn't mean that you're giving up on your legacy. You're not, because guess what? They're going to understand, that you serve because you're going to show up with a better work ethic, a discipline, working in, chaotic or, ambiguous situations is your norm, because if you've ever been into a combat zone, there's nothing, a plan's a plan until that first round is fired and then it's thrown out the window. But
Right.
we're accustomed to that, and so we can adapt and we can move on the fly. We like to plan things out. We want to minimize risk, but it's okay if things don't go exactly as planned. We know we'll figure it out and make it happen. And so I tell them to focus on that, and then take their skills and try to translate it. You got to do some studying. You got to find out what the current buzzwords are, in the corporate world in order to get that first look. And I firmly believe that, any veteran, worth their weight, once they get a chance to talk to somebody, then they're going to get hired, because the person, the individual, the hiring manager, whoever, is going to see a quality that they need in their organization. It may not be a perfect fit for the task at hand, but knowing that you got somebody that is trainable, willing to do, whatever it takes to further the mission, to me, that just goes a long way.
Yeah, and you said a key word there, trainable, because everybody going into the military, for the most part, like they have to go through some sort of training to just get into the military. Whether it's basic training and your AIT, and you're learning what your job is. You don't typically walk in off the street knowing how to fly planes or maintain them or that type of stuff. Some people, maybe they had some civilian background on that, but that doesn't tend to be the
Still got to
path
be
that the
able to.
majority of people go, right? Yeah. Yeah. So so you still have to be able to do it the military way. You still have to be trained. And so one thing that you got going for you, I don't care who you are, if you went through the military and you got through any level of military training, you're trainable. And so that's a huge asset to people.
Well,
So like you didn't know the healthcare industry, but you're able to learn it, right?
Well, I think that it's true, because when you're coming out of the military, not only you're trainable, but you're a lifelong learner, right? Because
Mhm.
guess what? Your training didn't stop, at AIT, because then you
You're
had an
right.
advanced course, and then you had, and then you had your professional military education, and then, so you're constantly learning and growing. Where in the civilian sector, you make it a job as a call center rep, and you're perfectly fine with that. And that's the only thing you ever do. Nothing wrong with that. But if an organization is looking for someone that's really going to help them move the needle, and grow their organization, you got to have somebody that's a lifelong learner, that's willing to continue to grow with them, and to challenge each other and be willing to
That's right.
take that assignment.
So, can you talk to us now? Let's kind of fast forward a little bit more. Um, Talk to us about Heroes on the Water and the mission of the organization, how it came to be, and how you got involved with them.
Yeah, so Heroes on the Water has been around since 2007, and it was started by another Air Force retiree. He was a retired pilot and an American Airlines pilot. And just like everyone else, during that season, when we're seeing a constant rise in veteran suicides, and really just the decline in the overall well-being of our service members, he happened to be an avid kayak fisherman. And he goes, and he recognized how he felt after being out on the water, being in nature. And it doesn't matter if you catch a fish, right? It's just how many
Yeah.
people have a bad, how many times you've just been out in nature and you come back and you're like, man, I just feel so much better. Well, he recognized that. And so he started Heroes on the Water. And and for the first several years, he was funding it all just out of his own pocket, just because he believed in it. So it started out at one small chapter, and now it's grown to where currently we have 55 chapters across 25 states, 55 volunteer chapters. I'll tell you a little bit more about the two different programs we have in a second. But I mean, the growth has just been phenomenal. We have assisted over 60,000 veterans, over 16,000 family members. We've opened it up to first responders too, to where those numbers are starting to increase, because we believe in those that serve, and they serve every single day, and we know the trials and tribulations that they face as well. So yeah, it started from one guy's idea, and then we have taken it further to where, like, when I came on board with them, I wanted to make sure that we are what we're doing is doing what we say it's doing. And so we actually commissioned a study with a PhD behavioral scientist out of Texas State University to measure the efficacy of our programs. And the results have just been phenomenal. So we look at, stress management, personal efficacy, and relationships. And out of those three areas, we got several subcategories that we measure. And the lowest scoring one is like 90% effective in helping people, deal with the day-to-day stresses in life. And so it's just truly, and that's when I really got excited about the organization. It's like, okay, they're taking this serious. They're not just out throwing people in plastic boats because it's fun and feels good. They believe in the therapeutic value that Mother Nature has to offer, and we're measuring it to make sure that we're making the right decisions and doing the right things, because all we want to do is help. We want to help our veterans and first responders and their families, because we do believe healing is a family affair. And that's why,
Sure.
and when we remove all the barriers, we want to make sure that those that are, interacting with us and engaging with our chapters and all that, there's not a single reason for them not to. So it doesn't cost them a thing. They don't have to have their own equipment. They don't even know how. I mean, we've got the people and the expertise there to teach them how to kayak, to teach them how to fish if they want. And fishing is, what we tell everybody: if you catch a fish, great. If you don't even, put a line in the water, that's okay too. Real quick, we were just at an event just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, where this one was a first responder, primarily first responder chapter. But we did have a couple veterans there too. And so while they were out on the water, we're all there volunteering, getting things set up and taking care of them. But while they're out on the water, this park had a real nice 2 mile loop walking path. So I was just walking the path to get some exercise while they're doing that. Was I'm coming around the corner, there's this little cove tucked in some trees and all that. And one of the participants, who seemed a little bit odd, I say, or off maybe, when they showed up. I mean, they showed up to a water event wearing blue jeans and, and so forth. So I'm like, wonder what this person has going on. Very, very quiet, didn't talk to anybody. Got out on the water. As I'm walking, I see him pulled into that cove, and he just kind of kicked back. And so I just poked my head through the trees and said, "Hey, everything okay?" Yeah. I said, "You just enjoying the tranquility?" He goes, "Yes, sir." And so I said, "Well, I'll leave you to it." I just walked on. Well, when we get back, he was the most talkative guy ever. So he shows up not talking. He spent some time in Mother Nature out on the water and comes back. And next thing you know, he's engaged with the entire group, and everybody's swapping stories. And it really just brings that affinity back that maybe was lost when people took off the uniform, and gives them an opportunity to discuss. They don't even have to get into heavy stuff. A lot of them do, but they don't have to. It just lets them know that there's like-minded people right there with them, and they're there. And so they don't have to do anything alone. And so it's just truly remarkable to watch.
And so you mentioned the different chapters around the country. Do they put on like regular events from time to time? How do these chapters operate, and what is it that they do?
Yeah, so we actually have two different programs. So our volunteer program is just like it states. That's the 55 chapters that we have, and they are volunteer led. What happens is, if we see a geography that we think has a need, then we could go in there and start searching for volunteers to build a local leadership team in order to get a chapter up. Or more often than not, on our website at heroesonwater.org, there's an opportunity for someone to say, "I'd like to start a chapter." And so we'll get several, inquiries, probably, anywhere from, 10 to 15 a month. People, want to inquire about what does it take to start a chapter? What's that mean? And so our director of volunteer programs will meet with them and her team, and kind of walk them through it. And if it's a good fit, then we start the chapter up. They typically, depending on where they're at, the season could be really short. Because if they're up in the Northeast, they're not out there fishing, in February.
Right.
Or it could be down in South Florida where they're pretty much going year round. But typically they do, our chapters average about 6 events, during the season. But then we have chapters that are out there doing it every single, an event a month. And if they have a longer season, then they may do 12, 13 events a year. Now our therapeutic chapters are slightly different. Actually, they're vastly different. We're still doing the same thing, kayak fishing, but we are partnered directly with the DoD and the VA for their in-resident treatment programs. When we get, if there's a soldier, in a soldier recovery unit or something like that, that's, going through some kind of treatment, could be there for 9 weeks. Well, once a week, part of their therapy is getting out on the water with our team.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, and that's just really cool. And the feedback we have from it is just phenomenal. And one of the things we've started now is because there's so many areas that the seasons are short, is we're doing some off-water skills training too, just to keep them engaged, to keep them, to bring those people still together. May not be on the water, but they're learning how to build a rod, how to to tie their own flies, how to do these different things that then they can go off and what happens usually is, people come out to a few events and next thing you know, they bought their own kayak and their own tackle and all that kind of stuff. So we ought to get some kickbacks is what I think. Kayak industry.
Yeah, I mean, you could be, set up a shop there, and you can start selling the kayaks and the reels and all the other equipment that goes with it.
We do
For
have great partners though. I mean, there's several of the kayak manufacturers that treat us well. They give us some pretty decent discounts on our equipment and really allow us to do what we're able to do because we couldn't get out there with the prices of some of those sport fishing kayaks. It just would be cost prohibitive. So,
Yeah, that's true. So you have two separate things, one volunteer led and one the therapeutic
correct.
side of things, where people go to during their recovery process. That's part of the program, is getting out on the water, or like you said, you may have other skills classes and things like that that they do, but that's all incorporated as part of the therapeutic process. The volunteer led side sounds like it's more recreational. This is
Yeah,
kind of a fun camaraderie building, team building kind of thing, like that, right?
it's almost because what happens is if you lead with therapy, you get nobody to show up, right? Yeah, because none of us want to admit that we need therapy.
Right, right.
So, but yeah, so it is therapeutic, and that's what we wanted to measure, and that's why we wanted to do that study, is because yeah, it's fun or whatever, but we wanted to highlight the fact because there's so many gaps in traditional medicine, especially when it becomes behavioral health and your overall mental well-being. And so by doing these studies, I mean, the study's peer reviewed, published, all of that, to where we're getting a lot more credibility for what recreational therapies bring to the table, and that's key, and that will open it up more because what we would love is that where we're working with so many different VAs, how the old saying, you've been to one VA, you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA. What I would love to see is, at the federal level, at the national level, the VA recognize this and saying, wow, what they're doing is good. We want this everywhere. That's what would be nice because what we're doing is we're doing great work, but we're having to go out and sell our free services to each individual VA. And so by doing things like this study and capturing the responses from our participants and sharing that, we're hoping that we'll kind of pull the curtain back on the positive impact that recreational therapies have. So,
Yeah, I hope so too. And you would hope, and I know this doesn't always happen, but you would hope that one hand would be able to talk to the other when in situations like that, where they might be like, "Hey, why doesn't everyone do this? Because it's actually working." That would be great. Um, But I could see, some reluctance maybe on some of the potential participants from trying something, like a recreational type therapy that uh, they haven't participated in any of this before. They've never gone fishing. They've never been out, on the water like that. Maybe folks from the city or something like that. They just the water is not readily available. So or out where I live in Arizona, where even the rivers that they label on the map, they as a river, there's no water in the river, so it's like
and dry
it's
creek,
so dry. So, for folks who maybe are, maybe new to this type of stuff, um, what kind of support is there for them, and what kind of basically, why should they give it a try? What is out there for
They
'em?
don't have anything to lose, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
that's
not
true.
cost them a dime. We're even going to feed them. We got such great support from our local communities that, very rarely do we have to spend a dime for the lunches we provide. We have so many different organizations that donate the food, find out what we're doing. They don't have to, like I said, they don't need any gear. They don't need to have any skills whatsoever, because the people that we have running these chapters are extremely skilled in this. They've been kayak anglers for years. They've worked in the industry. We have on our not all of our volunteers are veterans. They're just people that have a passion for veterans. Some of our best run chapters are led by civilians that love kayak fishing. They understand what the benefits of it, and they are patriotic, and they want to help those that serve our communities and serve our nation in any way they can. So what I would tell people is, what else in life have you tried that you have never done before, and you were surprised how much you enjoyed it and how good it made you feel? And think about that and come out and give it a try, because it may not be for you, but you know what? It's not going to cost you a thing to find out.
Well, and that's why I like highlighting organizations like yours on this show. And we have had all sorts of different recreational, or just call it alternative type therapies that folks are using. Everything people tend to have heard of equestrian type therapy and things like that. A lot of outdoor recreational type stuff. We even had people who offered surfing as a form of therapy, and also so I guess the reason why I'm saying this is because everybody's gonna be different. Some people are gonna go out there, they're gonna try it, and they're gonna fall in love with it, and they're gonna be like, "This, I found the thing that's gonna work for me." And other people are gonna go out there, they're gonna try it, and they're like, "You know what? This was a swing and a miss, and it didn't quite hit the mark for me." Um, but the whole point is keep trying something, because while maybe this one thing that you tried isn't the right fit for you, the next thing that you try might be. So get out there and keep trying. That's why I like to have folks like you on the show to talk about different types of therapies that are available, and different things that people can try, so that they actually do get out and do something. And I think just like in combat, if you're sitting there and things aren't going quite according to plan, and you start taking fire from a place that was unexpected, you're not going to just sit there and let it happen, right? You're
Yeah,
going to do something,
yeah.
and it may not be the right thing.
Fire, and you're going to reach it. Yeah. So,
But I forget who said this, but the quote, and I may butcher it. I'm gonna give it a shot anyways. But the best thing to do is the right thing. The second best thing to do is the wrong thing, and the worst thing to do is nothing. And
yeah, absolutely.
and so it's like, just keep trying something. You might have done the wrong thing, wrong in the sense that maybe it wasn't a good fit for you, but it doesn't really matter. There's so many other things out there. Go try something else. At least you tried, and you can check that thing off your list, and say, okay, well, I'll file that one away. I won't spend any more time on that, but I'll move on to that next thing.
Well, I think that one of the cool things, about the veteran organizations, like us and others, is that we all recognize that we don't have to be the end all, right? We
Yeah.
don't have to be everything. And so I'll give you an example. There's another organization called Regiment, and it's a gaming organization for veterans. Well, guess what? That's all online, and so their footprint is nationwide with 60,000, plus veterans, as part of their community. Well, they reached out to us as like, you know what? We know the benefits of what we do, but we also know the benefits of not having them sit in front of the computer all day, and so they said, is there a way for us to partner to where we can get them out and doing other things instead of sitting in front of a game? And I'm like, I love it,
Yeah.
because yes, what they do absolutely has value, but I can also see that just sitting there gaming all day is not for their best physical or mental well-being. And you have a good myriad of options and opportunities to really to achieve your best health. And that's what I love, is that we're not looking to be the end all. We have what we do, and we do it really well. We do it safely, and we've got the expertise, and at each of the chapters to help those that have no skills in it. But at the same time, if you want to go hunting, we're not going to take you hunting. But guess what? My personal Rolodex, I've got other organizations that I can call up the executive director for and say, hey, I've got a group that wants to go hunting. Can I connect them? And
Right.
so it's really just helping people find what they need in order to achieve their best health.
Yeah, and to your point, it doesn't necessarily have to be any just one thing that does that for you, and especially in places like you were talking about, like in the Northeast, you're not gonna be going fishing. I'm originally from Connecticut, so I'm familiar with what you're talking about. Uh, you're not gonna go fishing in February.
Uh,
It's too cold and all the ponds are iced over and, like, there's not
I
much for you there, you know? You could go ice fishing, I suppose, but
my,
sometimes
wife,
it
my wife is from northern Minnesota, and she
okay.
goes, "You go ice fishing." I was like, "No, I don't."
So I suppose you could do something like that, but there might be something else that you want to do in the off season, if you will, and there's like you said, that gaming community might be your thing, might not be. You might hate games and you don't want to do that thing. Okay, fine, but there's something else. There's all sorts of different organizations and folks out there who want to help veterans and first responders and folks like that, their families. So yeah, just keep trying, keep your your eye out there for um, other organizations, and be open to trying new things and seeing what might work. If I guess put it this way, if you're uh, in a spot where whatever you're doing now is not working for you,
Yeah.
you got
Keep-
nothing to lose, right? Try something else.
I mean, that's the definition of an idiot, right?
Right, right. Yeah, you don't want to keep doing that. Um, So I know you mentioned there's some costs involved and there's some different things that you guys are funding to kind of help uh, get these programs going. Where can people go if they want to either volunteer or don't make a donation, whether it's financial or you mentioned like some lunches and things like that get donated. Where can people go to find out more information about how to help support the organization?
Yeah, it's just www.heroesonthewater.org, and in there, on up on the top, there's ways to get involved, and people are the way I look at it. There's three real ways to help us out. One is advocacy, because we do not want someone that could benefit from what we do not know about us, right? So that's why I appreciate you taking, inviting us to be on your show today, is because this is important to get the
Yeah.
word out. And the second is volunteering. Either to volunteer to stand up a chapter in your area if we don't have one, or if we have a chapter in your area, then help the leadership team there and volunteer. And then third, of course, everything that we do does cost money. And so you can go give online right at our website, be part of our honor circle, and give you the exact details. You want to give, $10. Well, guess what? $10, you just pay for somebody's lunch that day. If you want to give $25, over the course of the year, over the life cycle of a kayak, I mean, kayak's life cycle is about 7 years. Well, guess what? You give $25 a month, you just covered the life cycle, for a kayak for a chapter. So there's so many different ways. That's the hardest part, is because we believe in what we do, but none of us like asking for money. We just say, hey, I'll tell you all about, what we do and the impact of it and all that kind of stuff. And then, you just follow your heart. Because it is, that's nobody on the team. We're horrible fundraisers, even though we do a pretty good job at it. It's just, that's the bad part of a nonprofit, is that you can't do what you do because you're not selling anything, so you just got to
Right.
rely on the philanthropic, generosity of either corporations or individuals.
Well, that's why I'm here. So I'm going to do it for you. So if you're listening to this, head on over to the website, which I'll have a link to in the show notes, and find a way to donate, make those donations, and help out the organization. So go and do that. You see, look at that. You don't even have to do it. I'll do it
Yeah,
for you.
appreciate it, Scott. We might have to bring him on the team.
There you go. You know what? This was just really like a job interview, and I was just like not telling you about it.
Those are the best
No.
ones. We just have a conversation.
Yeah, right. Uh, well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and sharing about the organization, sharing a little bit about your background, and sharing about what you guys do. I think the stuff that we talked about as far as the transition from military to civilian life was definitely relatable. I think to a lot of people, and the work that you guys are doing with Heroes on the Water, towards the overall well being of veterans, first responders, their families is really great. And I'm encouraging folks who are out there to get involved, whether it's volunteering, if that's something that you want to do, or as a participant, to get out there on the water and actually see the benefits of getting out there and doing that. I think there's a lot of value there. Even for the volunteers, volunteering
Yes,
feels good too. And so if you can get out there and help folks out and make a difference in somebody else's life, sometimes that is
that's
there's a lot
therapeutic.
of value in that, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so thank you for again taking the time to come on and for everything that you guys are doing. I really do appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Drive On podcast. If you want to support the show, please check out Scott's book, Surviving Son, on Amazon. All of the sales from that book go directly back into this podcast and work to help veterans in need. You can also follow the Drive On podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts.